Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to my first live stream video. I'm going to wait just a few minutes to see if anyone comes into the room before I begin, just to give people an opportunity to engage. And if you're on, please let me know if the volume is all right. Just give it a few minutes or another few seconds to allow some other people to sign in. This is my first live stream. I hope that you all enjoy. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share and invite people in. Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone. I'm just going to give it one more minute to allow some more people to come into the live stream. Today we're going to be talking about my first ham radio and what one should consider when they are looking to buy their first radio. What are the things that you should consider before you buy your radio, your first radio? Let me know if my volume is all right. Someone, please. All right, I don't want to keep anybody waiting. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Daniel, KC1NCF, and this is my amateur radio journey. Thank you for tuning in. I see we have at least one person watching. This is my first live stream, and I appreciate you coming to check out the channel. So today, like I said, I'm going to be talking about my first radio and also what one should consider before buying their first radio. What are the things you should think about to make that choice? So really quick, just my background. I'm 31 years old. I'm a married man, married for 5 years to my beautiful wife, Trinace. I have one beautiful son, Havon. He's 6 years old. And about 4 months ago, when we started to deal with this world pandemic, if you will, a lot of questions were asked, of course, as everyone had questions. Everyone was wondering what they should do. One of those questions was about communication. So naturally, being a father, being a husband, I wanted to make sure my family was secure. So I looked into communications and communication ability when and if the grid was able to ever to go down. And of course, one of the things I came across was ham radio. So I began to research it. I began to look it up to see what is ham radio, what is amateur radio, and how can it be effective for me in this time. So that's basically how I got started. I watched a lot of YouTube videos and it piqued my interest. I liked the idea of it. I seen the importance of it and the implications that it could have for someone in this time. So that's a little bit about myself. So here's my first radio. This is the first radio I purchased. This is a UV5X3 B-Tech. Let me know if you can see that. I'm working off my laptop camera. I haven't gotten any other equipment yet, but this is a B-Tech UV5X3, and this is the first radio that my wife and I purchased. I actually have a couple of them, and right after we got these radios, we also purchased this radio, or a few of these radios. This is a Wuxon KG805G. Now, there's a couple reasons why we bought two different types of radios and why I intend on trying to buy more. But first, this radio here, this is what you would classify as a ham or amateur radio. All of the different radios I have here, this FRS radio, this one doesn't actually belong to me. I'm borrowing this radio. This is an FRS radio, and it is the one radio that you do not have to have a license in order to transmit on, right? So when I chose the first radio I bought, it was really because it's what I seen. And a lot of the videos I watched, I seen people, they had this Baofeng radio, this BTEC radio, and it seemed like a very popular radio. So I went with it and didn't really know much about it. Something like that. Didn't really know much about what that was, what that meant. And I just got one because I knew I needed a way to communicate. I have it now. It's a pretty good radio. It's probably on the lower end of the ham radio spectrum, but it definitely gets the job done. So I chose this radio because it's all I knew at the time. And I thought because so many people had it, that it was probably one of the better radios. I learned later that it's not necessarily that. Like I said, it gets the job done. So this radio comes with 2 antennas. The one that is on here now. This is a VHF 220-225 megahertz. I don't know if you can see that. And it also came with another antenna. This one is a FM 136 174-400 to -520 megahertz. Now these 2 antennas are graded for different types of communication, if you will, for different bands. And that's some of what we're going to talk about as far as what antenna to choose or what radio to choose when you are looking to get into amateur or ham radio, right? So what else came with this radio? It came with 2 antennas. It came, of course, with a battery. It came with a clip. It came with a wrist strap. And it also came with a booklet, of course, your user manual. It comes with a headphones jack, a headphone set. It comes with a base charger, which I have it over here, but that's plugged in. A few accessories that I chose to buy to add on to this radio as I started to research and study and learn more about antennas. I chose to buy this. This was recommended. This is a Nagoya. This is a Nagoya. I'm gonna take it out of the package so we can see that more clearly. Feel free to comment, ask any questions. I see my brother Eric is in the comments. Thank you for joining the show, sir. This is a Nagoya NA-771. This is a dual band, what's called a dual band antenna. It's good for VHF, which is very high frequency, and UHF, which is ultra high frequency. There's 2 things you have to consider when you're shopping for your radio or for your radio accessories. Right? I also buy, and I recommend that anybody who wants to pay for a Baofeng or BTEC radio, any radio that has a programming cable, you should buy one of these programming cables. This one I bought from BTEC, so it is definitely good for this radio. You'll find that there are there are programming cables that are sold that are generic that do not always work on every radio or do not work properly. It's important that you get yourself the right product because in times of need, you don't want to have to be working with something that is faulty. So when I first started to look into these radios, I learned, like I said, that that's not necessarily the best radio. And there's a few reasons. Now, this radio here is what's called a tri-band radio, and it operates on VHF plus 1.25 meters and UHF. Those are 3 different bands or bandwidths that you're able to communicate through with that radio. Now, why is that important? Because depending on where you would like, the range that you would like to communicate, how far your family is from one another, or those you want to keep and communicate with, will determine what type of radio you get. So there's 3 tiers, if you will, of radio. It's FRS, which stands for Family Radio Service. There's GMRS, which is General Mobile Radio Service, and then there's Amateur Radio. Now there's a few other ones in between, but they all basically fall within those 3 categories. You also have MERS, which is multi-user radio service. You have also CB, which is Citizens Band Radio. Now, those are all radios that you would want to, the type of radios you want to buy if you are looking to communicate with people on a local scale. So people within your neighborhood, people within your community, they're good line of sight radios, meaning that if you are if you all live in the same community on the same street, you could likely communicate with one another over a certain amount of distance. As long as there aren't too many obstructions, buildings, trees, and other objects in your way, the radios will be able to communicate. But as soon as you start putting buildings and trees and other obstacles in the way, you lose the effectiveness of the radio frequency. That's when you have to rely on repeaters, amplifiers, and other different types of antennas in order for your signal to get across to whoever it is you're communicating with. So FRS, GMRS, MERS, which is MURS, CB, which is Citizens Band Radio, all of those are local type radios. There's also a marine version of radio that is intended to be used on the water, and it's suggested that you only use those type of radios on the water. I don't know too much about those to go into them, but the next class would be a step up. Now, FRS, FRS, Citizens Band, and MERS do not require a license. You can buy these radios, you can listen to different channels, you can transmit on different channels. You can train your child how to use them. You can use them for little small outdoor gatherings or trips or excursions or whatever. They do not need a license, but they're not as powerful as other radios, and they are not all modifiable or programmable. The next tier would be general mobile radio service. Now, those do require a license, and there are a few things that are changing with the laws that I'm gonna go into in a little while. But GMRS, general mobile radio service, these radios, which this is one, you must have a license in order to transmit on this radio. Now, I say transmit because there's a difference between listening, which is receiving, and transmitting. If you go and buy this radio, if you go buy a ham radio, if you go buy an FRS radio, any of these radios, you can tune into any frequency that you can find and listen to whatever comes over that radio and not have to worry about any type of legal ramifications. If you want to be able to actually pick up this radio in a non-emergency situation to communicate with your loved one, with a friend, with family, you have to have a license. Now, the license for this type of radio, GMRS, you would go to the FCC's website, the Federal Communications Commission, and you would have to apply for the license and then pay, right now at least, I paid $70. Once you secure that license, I paid for my license on, if I'm not mistaken, it was on May 7th, and I received the license on May 10th. Now, with that license, I'm able to allow my family to operate these radios, transmit and receive on my license alone. They don't have to go out and get their own licenses. That's a big plus. I'll go into that in a little bit. So when you're talking about the GMRS radios, they have a little bit more flexibility than these FRS radios. This radio here, FRS, the antenna is affixed to it. You cannot remove the antenna. You cannot replace it with another one. The channels are pre-programmed in, and you cannot add channels or program this. It's not modifiable, and it's not programmable. It's set to a certain amount of frequencies, and it's set to a certain power, which I believe was 0.5. And now with the new law, they're going to allow you to have up to 2 watts. So 0.5 watts is what the previous law states. The new law, you can use up to 2 watts of transmitting power with an FRS radio. I believe that's what it says, but I'm gonna read what it says on this website in a minute. Now with this radio here, just like the ham radio, this antenna can be removed. And this one here is a UHF, ultra high frequency. It's a 400-470 megahertz. That's the range for it. See that one a little better than the other antennas I showed. Now, I can take this antenna and put it on the ham radio antenna, put it on this radio. And depending on who I was trying to communicate with or how far would determine what kind of, and the gain and impedance on the antenna will determine what kind of communication I get or the quality of communication. So with this radio, you can, once you've found the right antenna, you know who you're trying to communicate with, you understand your terrain and the terrain between you and that person, you select the right antenna, and you can, this is also programmable. It's modifiable, meaning you can take off parts, you can open it up and change parts inside. You can use your knowledge to upgrade this radio on your own or have someone do it for you. That's very important, and it's a huge part of what amateur radio is about. It's a learning experience, really. It's a tool, but it's a learning experience. So this has regional capabilities if you want. While the FRS you can do in your neighborhood, this one, when you tap into or do what's called hitting a repeater, you're capable of communicating further distances, like from one side of your city to the other side, depending on how big your city is, and depending on your abilities to hit the repeaters. You can communicate even regionally, meaning from one state to another, as long as it's not too far. What that is basically you'll program a frequency into this radio that is capable of communicating with a repeater or a large antenna that's connected to a radio on top of a building somewhere in the area. This signal will go to that repeater, and that repeater will boost your signal and send it further and with more power so that it can reach people at further points. And what it's basically doing is, it's the higher up the antenna is on the repeater, the farther the line of sight of that repeater is. Because when you're dealing with radio technology, if you are not reflecting your signal off of the ionosphere, then you can only go as far as the horizon of whatever terrain you're on. So the repeater is much higher, it has a much further line of sight, thus you can get your signal further. Now, there's more to that. That's why I call this my, I say in my description to have people join me on my journey through ham radio, because I've heard some awesome things and I've seen some things where people can build antennas that allow them to bounce a signal off the moon to anywhere else on the earth. Depending on the time of the day and the conditions, they're able to do so. You can communicate with the International Space Station with some of these radios, as long as you know how to set up the radio, program it, and key all of that up. So the next tier, like I said, the amateur radio. And so back to the GMRS radio, these operate on different bandwidths. You have 80 meters, you have 60 meters, you have 40 meters. 80 meters works in 3 megahertz, 60 meters is 5 megahertz, and 40 meters is 7 megahertz. That's important stuff to know, because when you buy it and you look at the numbers on the antenna, you look in your manual and it tells you if it's a UHF, VHF, that will let you know how far you can communicate. So if you're somebody who only needs to communicate with your people in your neighborhood, all your family is close and together, you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money getting an intricate antenna to enable to do so. You get what you need for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? So you have to know those things. And for this, like I said, you need the $70 license, and you and your family are good on that license. So you're able to communicate a decent amount of distance. Now, these ham radios also, of course, they're the next tier up. Fully programmable, fully modifiable. Antenna can be removed and switch between different, like I can take that one off, and I can put on this big Nagoya antenna, which might look crazy, but because the antenna is longer, size does make a difference, fellas. Never mind that expression, but the longer the antenna, the better. There are other factors that go into it, but like I said, the higher up your signal is able to emanate from or originate from will determine how far you can communicate. Now, like it's fully programmable, it's fully modifiable. You can open this radio up. If you know anything about radio technology, you can take out things, you can add things, you can gut this thing and make it capable of doing more than what it does out of the box. That's a beautiful thing if you understand. Now, Now these radios, this radio specifically, and a lot of the Baofengs have pre-programmed 128 slots in order for you to do what's called savoring on memory channels. Now, when I turned it on, it said frequency mode. If I press this little red button, it's going to switch to channel mode. Frequency mode. Oh, I had it backwards. So it was on channel mode. Now it's on frequency mode, which allows me to type in whatever frequency I need to get to. And those are not, anything on that channel is not, or that mode is not saved to your radio. And that's where the programming cable comes in handy on the other side. So when you're in channel mode, you can preset 128 channels into this radio. It's very important. This, with the new law, from my understanding, these can operate on up to 22 channels, fixed channels. This one, the GMRS, can operate on up to 30 channels. With also, there's optional what they call privacy tones or subtones that you can go into within a channel to make your communication a little less likely for someone to come across, if you will. Anyone with a radio that knows how to use it can get on your channel, but using the subtones and the privacy tones allows you a little bit more discretion when you're communicating, and it also opens that number of 30 up so that you have other options. So it's 30 channels on the surface, but really you have more options in that if you know how to program in subtones or privacy tones. This radio with the 128 channels, of course, this one is also capable of having subtones and privacy tones. And with the ability to enter in frequencies, there is no limit to how many different frequencies you can actually utilize with this radio. I can go in and type. They just won't necessarily be saved into my memory channels. I can put in a frequency here and go into my menu and save something to the memory channel, but the slot is still capped off at 128. Now, that being said, on this side, I press these buttons, and you probably can't see that. I'm working on getting me some other equipment. But I can scroll through and it's giving you the number of the channel, but all of these channels are pre-programmed to repeaters and other things that I can communicate. I can listen into the EMS, I can listen into the fire department, the police department, I can listen to any repeater that I have programmed into my radio, or any frequency that I have programmed to my radio. Now that is very, very useful. There are other radios that you can buy that have 200 channels that you can program. There are some that have 1,000 channels that you can program, and that should be a factor in or factored into your decision when you choose to buy a radio. Now, these radios, the license for these, you don't necessarily pay for the license. There's a test that you have to take in order to acquire a license for these amateur radios. And there's a good reason why, because of the capability of these radios. Someone with even a little bit of knowledge could use this radio to listen in on, like I said, police frequencies. You can listen in on military frequencies. You can listen in on, if you know what you're doing, you could listen in on even the frequencies that the airlines use. Now, they have their stuff encrypted. Sometimes they have their stuff encrypted. There's a lot of protections they have, and I would never recommend that anyone ever go and try to manipulate or transmit on any of their frequencies. But if you can find the frequency, technically, it's not illegal to listen. That being said, the capabilities of the radio make it as such that it is necessary for someone who has this radio to have a license and have a minimum amount of knowledge so that they don't interfere with something that could get them or someone else harmed, cause harm, or get themselves in trouble. There are 3 different tiers of license when it comes to this radio. Myself, I have the first tier, which is called a technician's license. That license allows me access to VHF, very high frequency, UHF, and I believe 2 meters, 70 meters. Still learning that stuff. But basically, within those bands, I'm allowed to operate this legally. I'm allowed to transmit. I can listen to anything without the license, but I'm allowed to transmit, meaning I can push the button and talk over those frequencies, provided there are steps to doing that as well, that I handle it right, and there would be no legal implications. The next level up would be general class license. And all right, so for the technician's license, you have to, like I said, there's no fee necessarily for the license itself, but there is a $14 charge to take the test. And that is to help fund and help secure those who administer the test, the VECs and VEs, those who administer the tests to the people. And I had to go pay the $14. I had to study. I studied for 2 weeks. There's a question pool of 400 or 400 something questions that I studied, out of which they pulled 35 questions, and you have to get at least 27 of them right. If I'm correct, 27 77 of them correct in order to pass the test. I passed with 33. Praise be to God. And so I got that license, $14 for the test, a little bit of study, and I have my license now. I can operate on those 2 channels. Now the next tier, the general class, same number of questions, 35. I'm not sure, but I believe the question pool changes. There might be some questions that carry over into the question pool for general, but there are questions that exist in that do not exist in the technician's class study material or their question pool. So same story, $14 to pay for the test. Study a little bit, immerse yourself in some study. It's worth it. And you take your test and you get your license. Now with that license, you are allowed access to some of the HF, which is high frequency bands, and that allows you to communicate even further. HF is for regional, also national capabilities, so transmitting capabilities. So, and it all depends on your knowledge. You can get the license, you can spend the money on the radio, but if you don't take any time out to actually learn how to key in a repeater or a program repeater and key in and call your CQ, which is basically calling out to let people know you're on the air, waiting for somebody to respond or make a contact, then it doesn't make a difference. That's why it's a learning experience. It's a journey, but it's also a tool, because we live in a day and time where 10 years ago, we weren't thinking about a pandemic. We weren't thinking about the kind of things we think about now. And your phone service could drop. What do? You're in a spot, or you're just generally you're driving through the mountains. You're somewhere where your phone does not work. You could use this radio in any of those situations, provided you know what you're doing. Which I say again, and I know it's being repetitive. You have to do the research, you have to study, you have to apply yourself to know how to actually use that radio, so that if you ever ended up in an emergency situation or just in a situation where you had to get in contact with someone, you're not stuck with just a piece of plastic. Because that's all it is. It's a piece of plastic if you don't know what you're doing with it. Just like any other tool. You know, you can hold the hammer, but you got to know how to swing the hammer. So these operate on 40 meters, 20, they operate on any range, but your license allows you, I should say, to operate on different frequencies. So the next level up in license is the amateur extra. Amateur extra is, I'm not sure the number of the question pool, but I know it's 50 questions that will be administered to you from out of the question pool. And I'm not sure, but I can get that later. There's a certain amount of questions you have to get right in order to pass the test. Once you pass that test, you have access to all of the bands that are allowed in the amateur radio world. Now, that is an extremely, well, I would say that's one that I'm aiming to get. It would be the most helpful, because if you can legally transmit on any of those frequencies, then you are capable of talking to literally anyone around the world. If I had that license, I could demonstrate going in, keying in a repeater, and I might not get a response, but I would be legally able to press this button and communicate with someone in China, in Africa, in Finland, whatever, depending on the antenna. Like I said, if I have an antenna set up on my roof, if I have the everything on my radio programmed right, I could communicate with this radio directly to someone's hip in Africa without having to worry about a service provider, without having to worry about whether or not a tower was taken down or knocked down. We're dealing with a lot of weather. I was just speaking to someone less than an hour ago in Springfield who their family is without power right now because of the storm that is going on. So in that situation, with their power down, they would be able to communicate with these radios. Their phone service wasn't, that was just their lights and stuff like that. So that's how I was able to speak to them through a Zoom call. But the reality is, if their communications had been down, I wouldn't have had that conversation. And if those people were in need, they wouldn't have any way to communicate with anyone if there wasn't anyone in their immediate area at the time. So those are these are the two radios that I bought. Like I said, those are some of the factors that you have to consider when you want to choose your radio. Do you want to just communicate locally? Do you need to just communicate locally? Are you opening a business where you have multiple floors, dozens or tens of employees that need to be able to communicate over a wide distance? Are you in trucking? Are you somebody who likes to hike? You like to go camping and you're always out and about in areas that aren't necessarily close to any radio towers or cell phone towers, and your phone doesn't get good service. Depending on how far you are, how far you typically go, you need to decide which radio works best for you. If you're buying it just for fun, some people buy these radios, some people get into ham radio as a hobby. Well, I'd say most people get into it as a hobby. And because they're in it as a hobby, if they were ever in an emergency situation, by default, they understand how to use these radios effectively enough to potentially get themselves out of a tight spot. If you buy it for emergency purposes and you don't treat it like a hobby, meaning using it regularly to learn and understand it, then it won't help you at all, even though you bought it for that purpose. What else? You have to understand whether or not you have everyone has the ability to pass a test, but some people don't necessarily put forth an effort. You don't want to go buy a whole bunch of radio equipment and you have your technician's license, but you don't have the drive to go and study that question pool to pass a test of 50 questions. Some people are struggling to get their technician's license, and it's not that they aren't capable of getting it, they don't have the drive. And I say this because I've seen many YouTube videos of people say, I use it, but I don't necessarily have a license yet, but they're doing tutorials and all of that kind of stuff. So that's something else to consider, what type of radio you want to buy. There's also the matter of price. This radio, I don't know how much this radio costs, but this is the type of radio that most people are used to seeing. It's probably the most recognizable style of radio, if you will. You can buy these at Walmart, CVS, or whatever sells these little, what they call bubble pack radios. You can buy 2 in a pack. Most people call them a walkie-talkie. They're also known as an HT. A ham radio typically referred to as HT or handy talkie. I don't know why that's the case, but that's the case. I'm sure you can buy one of these for $12 right out of the back. You go to any type of radio or computer store, you buy them really fairly cheap. Now, this radio also was fairly cheap. When I bought this radio, I think it was $39. I looked at it a couple of days ago to tell someone the price, and the BTEC UV5X3 from BTEC or Baofeng Tech's website, because I recommend if you do buy any type of radio, buy it from buy it from the company themselves. There's certain types of privileges and protections you get when you do that. You always want to make sure that your equipment is protected, because something happens to it, you want to be able to replace it, claim a warranty or whatever have you. So it was $39 when I paid for it. Times are tough. I'm sure a lot more people are looking into ham or amateur radio because of the times we're living in. So the price is going up. I would say get one of these. Matter of fact, it took a month and a half for the radio to get to me. They didn't tell me up front, I'm gonna say this, they didn't tell me up front, but after I bought the radio, I got an email saying that it would take at least 30 days before they could ship the radio. This was, like I said, in March. It was actually in March. I got my license in May, but it was in March, early March, that I started looking into the radios. And so it took me a while before I actually got the physical radio to my home. Keep that in mind. If you're looking, you need to do your research now. Times are getting tough, and they're likely to get tougher before they get better. Get the kind of things you need to secure yourself and your family now, because more obstacles are potentially on their way. No one knows the day, the time, the hour, but it's best to have it and not need it, as the old saying goes, than to need it and not have it. So keep that in mind. $59 at this time from the Baofeng Tech website. I don't have no affiliations with them. I'm just giving you the truth. I'm not getting paid for that. And this is not a monetized channel. I'm not making any money off of this. Just put that out there. This radio here Now this is the ham radio. This is the one that you need the big license for, if you will. It has more capability. This is 59 now. It was 39 when I got it. This radio here, the GMRS, which doesn't have as much capability, but it does have its own, what's the word I'm looking for? Its own, positives, if you will. This radio actually called me. Now this is a Wuxon or Oshang. I've heard it pronounced a few different ways. I couldn't tell you if I'm saying it right. If someone knows the proper pronunciation, whether you're on the live stream now or if you see this video later, comment or get in contact with me, let me know the proper way to pronounce the radio. But this Wuxon is probably one of the better GMRS radios I would say that you can get. It's a fairly good brand, good quality radio from the research I've done, at least, and from what I've heard from people who are into ham radio and been into ham radio for some time. This costs $79 a radio. Now, like I said, with this license, and one of the pros and cons, that's the term I look for. One of the big pros to this, other than your ability to allow your family to use this on your license, is that because you have 3 tiers of radio, FRS, GMRS, ham radio, you're not, even with a license, you're not legally allowed to transmit from this radio to this radio. Even with a license, it would be illegal to do so because the amount of power that this puts out is actually counterproductive to this. And also because this has a limited amount of channels and you have access to unlimited frequencies, if you will, here, to do so would be to take away from the ability of those who have these radios to have an open line of communication. So that's a couple of the reasons why. But that being said, with this radio here, the GMRS and the FRS, they have intersecting channels. At the moment, I believe there are 7 intersecting channels. This one is, I'm gonna read that law as a matter of fact, or the change. Initially, this had a set amount of channels, and it had 7 that interacted with this one. But like I said, they said these ones are now going to have 22 channels, and these ones are going to have 30. And I know some of the frequencies still are interchangeable. I can't say how many now at this point, but at one point in time, it was 7. So as long as this radio was set to transmit at a watt or power output that is the same as this one, it would be legal. So if this was only capable of 0.5 power output or wattage output, then you would have to use this radio on one of those channels, but you would have to reduce the power output to 0.5 watts so that it is not does not harm, but does not interfere with the communication between the 2 radios. You can get a clear communication. That's very important for a few other reasons, and why I say that really, especially if you're going to use these for emergency purposes, it's best to have both, at least one of each type of radio. Because if you're in a situation where in your neighborhood, in your surrounding area, you're the only person with this type of radio, you still want to be able to communicate with people on this level. So it's best to have both. If all your people around you only have these radios, how can you communicate with them, right? So why not just secure yourself at least one of each, right? And be able and have the ability to communicate with those you need to, just in case they don't have the same enthusiasm as you, they're not as prepared, but you need to speak to them. Well, I know so-and-so a block away who's not too far, they're not, it's line of sight. I can reach them on channel 2, on channel 5, channel 7 with this radio. And if I needed to speak to somebody a city over, I could key this up and communicate with them. But I believe in having the options. So I'll put that out there. It's really up to you, and it depends on the reason why you're buying the radio in the first place, which is what this is all about. Now, also, like I said, these have intersecting channels. Like I said, the other pro is that you can use this to communicate with your family. Now, with this one, I suggest that if you do have a family, encourage them. You don't want to, there's no compulsion or anything. You don't want to you can't force no one into anything. But, even if they don't get the license, train your family. If you decide, train your family how to use this radio. because they might find themselves in an emergency situation. I don't need that. What I need that for? I'm good. But they might find themselves in an emergency situation, and you'd rather them know how to use the radio and be able to do so than not know. So, encourage them to get this, at least know how to use the radio and to get the license. Now, I said before you can transmit, or you couldn't transmit if it was not an emergency situation. Now, there's a lot of stuff out there about that. Now, on the test, one of the questions in the question pool, and it likely comes up on every test, it's probably one of the few questions that they always put in the test, is about when you're able to actually communicate with a ham radio without a license. And the answer to that is that only when there is immediate, well, I don't think so, but basically when someone is in a life-threatening situation, or when someone's life or property is immediately in danger. Now I'm paraphrasing, I don't have that right in front of me. But basically, it has to be an actual emergency. Your house has got to be, someone's house or property's got to be burning down. You have to be in a life or death situation, basically. Cat stuck in a tree. It might be an emergency for you, but it's not an emergency enough for them to excuse your using the radio legally and not acquiring that huge fine. I've heard different numbers. I'm not going to say the number because I don't know for sure, but I've heard some large numbers as far as the fine, and that people have actually been fined for using them in the wrong situation. So that's a few things about why. I don't want to belabor the point or bore anybody if I'm boring anybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have if anybody in the chat has any questions, or if anybody that watches this video at a later time, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You can leave a message on this YouTube channel. You can also contact me at kc1ncf_ARJ@yahoo.com. My Instagram is kc1ncf_ARJ on Instagram. And on Facebook, it's KC, one spelled out. So it's KCONE, NCF, pardon me, KC1, ONE, NCF_ARJ at Facebook. Feel free to ask me any kind of questions. If I don't have the answer to the question, I'll get the answer. You can also, as a matter of fact, like I said, I'm using my webcam right now. This is my first live stream, and I hope I did a decent job at least. But I just started a GoFundMe because we're in hard times, and I do want to be able to get myself a little bit more equipment without my wife beating me over the head for spending too much money. So if you're interested, you can actually go and support me through my GoFundMe account, which I have posted to my Facebook page. As I start to get different equipment, I'm going to get the right types of cameras so I can share my screen, so that I can I can bring guests on and interact with the audience a little bit better. Better lighting, better camera, so it's a better visual, and better audio. And as I'm on this journey, I hope that you can continue to join me on that journey, learn something, teach me something. So like, subscribe, share, comment, and enjoy the journey. Daniel, KC1 NCF signing off. Thank you. Peace.